Right, guys, welcome home. So I can hear one of the clapping. Awesome. So for I guess those who don't know your background and stuff, Shannon, just maybe start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and yeah, what brings you to be seeing us here at Headspace.
Well, my name is Shannon Molloy. I'm a journalist based in Sydney these days. I've been here for about 6 or 7 years now, but grew up in Queensland on the coast, about halfway up the coast of Queensland, and lived in Brisbane for a little while, where I went to university and studied journalism. I've worked in journalism for about 14 years now across sort of print, digital, and publishing. And these days, I'm a senior reporter at news.com.au, where I cover general issues, but mostly sort of breaking news and issues of the day. But one of my particular areas of interest is mental health, and particularly youth mental health. And so I've done quite a lot of work in that space. I've just written a book. It's called 14. I've prepared a copy here. It came out on April 1st. On April 2, I was due to head off on a 4-week tour sort of around Australia, doing a lot of promotion, but also stopping in at different community groups along the way, particularly in the regions, to speak to young people about the book and some of the themes in it. Obviously, coronavirus had other plans, and that was all cancelled. And so I thought I'd come and chat to you virtually in this strange new world of Zoom to tell you a little bit about myself and my book, and some of the things that I hope young people, whoever they are, can get out of my experience and the path that I walked just a little while before you. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy to see so many people. And I'm especially thrilled that a couple of you have already read my book. That's amazing. So thank you for having me. That's a little snapshot of me.
Awesome, and thank you. Thank you for coming along. It was, I think, you yourself originally reached out to us, and the timing was perfect because we were planning our May event. We thought, well, if they both the two line up, the stars have aligned. We're really glad to have you here. Obviously, once Corona goes away, we maybe hope that you will make your way up the coast and come and
I'd
visit.
love to.
By then, we might have our summer back again too, so we can show
Yeah.
up the story properly. So I guess my next question based on that is mentioning the book sort of drags me into a line of topics about that. And I really love to know what brought you to originally sort of have the concept and the idea that you'd write almost like an biography, I suppose it is.
Yeah, so the book is 1 year in my adolescence, when I was 14, as the title gives away. Growing up in regional Queensland, going to a sort of footy mad all boys Catholic school in a town of maybe 18 or 20,000 people, very sort of small-minded, narrow-minded town, where being gay was just about the worst thing that you could be. It's not terribly long ago in the scheme of things. It was the year 2000 that this book is set in, and it was kind of a different time that's almost hard to imagine now. It was 3 years after homosexuality was decriminalised in Tasmania. There were no gay characters on television or in films, except in really disparaging, sort of nasty ways. Ricky Martin was still straight. It was just a very different time. And so we've come a long way. But the reason I wrote this book is because I write a lot about mental health and LGBTQI issues. And I know that while we've come a long way, we still have such a long way to go, particularly in the regions. The stats on mental illness burden and suicide amongst gay and lesbian kids in the regions is horrific. Amongst trans kids, it's almost double the rate. That's really troubling. So across the spectrum, the rainbow spectrum, kids are still really struggling, just like I did, even though 20 years have passed since my experience of sort of almost daily horrific bullying, discrimination and being ostracised in my own community. And so I wanted to write about that, both to remind adults in the world that we still have a long way to go, and the importance of helping vulnerable young people, but also for young people to show them that it gets better. You know, I lived this absolutely horrific year that I thought would be you know, a sign of the rest of my life to come, that this is how I was going to be treated wherever I went, that I was always going to feel as sad and as low as I did. Uh, and um, and of course, things get better. Things always get better. And so I wanted to sort of illustrate that with my own story. I know the power of storytelling through my day job. And about 4 years ago, I had the chance to write about myself for the very first time and tell a sort of anecdote from my 14th year going to this horrible school. And it just resonated so strongly with not just people my age, but with young people now who said they experienced things that are similar to that, and that there was some comfort in knowing that they're not alone, and that, you know, they look to where people like me are now, and they feel some sense of hope. And so that's what I wanted to put into the book. It's harrowing at times, but it's also full of love and kindness, and again, that message that things get better.
Yeah, touching on the love and kindness side of things, I read a really sort of heartwarming article by yourself for Mother's Day that was on news.com.au. And sort of it seems like a really good time to bring in the supportive side of things that were there for you as well. What sort of role did your mum play in things for you? And was there anybody else too that was a supportive character in your story?
Well, I had three main friends, Morgan, Jess, and Nicole, and the four of us were just sort of, you know, silly and camp and naughty, and spent our days, you know, sitting behind the shopping centre, smoking cigarettes and dancing in Morgan's living room and coming up with stupid choreography to really trashy 90s pop music.
TikTok,
Um,
TikTok was TikTok.
exactly. Thank God it wasn't filmed. Um, that would have haunted me for years to come. Uh, and so they were sort of my main support, and I was about as open and honest with them as I could be at the time. The other huge support in my story and in my book is my mum. And my mum didn't know I was gay. She probably suspected a little bit, but we had never discussed it. I was terrified to tell her, but she was a huge support in the sense that, you know, she tried to really remind me that, you know, my value as a person was still there deep down beneath all of this sadness and this sort of horror at school. And she would march into the principal's office every other day and, you know, demand that things be done. And if she heard, you know, a kid yell faggot at me from the street, she would sort of chase after them and grab them by the collar and drag them back and make them apologize, which sometimes made things worse. So she was just really wonderful, and she remains my absolute best friend. And of course, when I eventually came out to her, I just you know, feared that she would disown me, and she didn't. And obviously, that's not the case for all young people. It's not everyone is as lucky as I was. But in my story, my mum and my three siblings as well, along with my group of friends, were wonderful. And I really lent on them to help get me through this tough year, both by asking for practical advice, by relying on mum and my brothers, particularly for protection, but also in just the silliness of life, dancing and singing and, you know, talking about our crushes on Heath Ledger and all the other sort of, you know, just little ordinary things that were an escape from the extraordinary of life. And so they were wonderful. And I guess the message in that for young people, I hope, is, you know, lean on the people that love you, and ask them for support. It's sometimes hard to do. You know, I still sometimes feel like I'm being a burden if I ask a mate for help when I'm not feeling great. But really, you know, that's what the people who love you are for. And always reach out for help. And just quickly, the other really supportive person who features heavily in this year and in this book was a local sort of youth counsellor who ran the youth centre in Yeppoon, and she was just this sort of mad cat hippie who, you know, ran drum circles and loved tie-dye and was just lovely with not a nasty bone in her body. And I spent every day essentially at the youth centre with her, and really got involved in the programs that they were running, and that was sort of a safe space and a really productive space as well. So yeah, I guess it was sort of the headspace of its day, but probably in a very primitive form.
Yeah, we used to have our PCYC quite in the same building the Headspace is in now, and that was sort of a similar environment for me when I was young too. You know, have a fight with mum and dad, go down to a boxing class, like it was, yeah, a really good thing. And obviously now that mental health is more accessible than it has been in previous decades, if your family isn't the support or your friends aren't the support, hopefully someone in between is, and then we're there to fill the gaps.
Yeah.
So with the book itself, like how long did that take you to create and write? And was there a big process in, I guess, fine tuning that and figuring out what the end product was going to be?
So I wrote the first draft in just over 5 months, which was pretty good. And then from there, my publisher and I went through, I think, about 3 rounds of major edits, which was sort of structural stuff like ripping bits from the end and bringing them back into the beginning, and beefing up certain characters and toning down others that weren't as important, and really working on the detail and the colour. As a news reporter, I'm used to being quite short, sharp and succinct. So suddenly having 80,000 words to play with meant that I could use a lot of colour and description, but I wasn't necessarily quite as experienced as I should have been. So the editing process went on for probably about 9 months, and then it went to the printer in January this year. And yeah, and then April 1, it sort of came out into the world, into a very strange world. And so it's been a lot of this sort of thing, like virtual Q&As with bookshops, and doing a lot of things on the phone that should have been in person. Yeah, but it's been wonderful. The response has been really good, and people have been very kind in emailing me, letting me know what they think. And so it's good. It was about an 18-month process all up that still feels surreal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it must be a strange experience getting to the end of something like that and having a physical book in your hand from, literally
I
start.
cried.
Yeah.
When they sent me the very first copy that came off the printer. It was yeah, I mean, this is what I've wanted to do my whole life, and it happened. It's wonderful.
And while you were writing it, did you learn anything new about yourself? Was there any discoveries you made in the process?
Yeah, it was sort of the things that happened to me around this age. I kind of, once I left that town, I never looked back, and I very rarely ever went back. And I haven't been back in sort of maybe 8 or 9 years now, which suits me just fine. But the consequence of that was that I put all these experiences into, a box and buried it away deep inside of me. And I thought I was fine, that it didn't affect me anymore. But of course, you carry the scars of things that happened to you. And so writing the book was an opportunity to lift the lid on that and relive it, which was challenging at times, and a little bit triggering at times. But also, I don't know, I just sort of, I found peace in some ways. And the other thing that I learned was, when I went through this at 14, and in the very occasional times I would think about it after that in my early adult years, I thought that I was really weak and that I hadn't coped well with it, and that, I was kind of this victim or whatever. But then with hindsight, looking at it after all this time and almost clinically, I realised that I was actually quite strong. And I think all vulnerable young people experiencing tough times, regardless of what they are strong purely by virtue of the fact that they survive. And that takes a lot of strength and guts and courage to live your life amidst whatever it is that you're experiencing. And so that was kind of nice as well. And I think that was part of the process of finally putting all of this out there and being, I don't know, at ease with it all after so long. Yeah, I sort of underestimated myself for a long time. And so that was good.
You've touched on two of my favourite points in terms of even like, counselling younger people. And for those in the group chat, I just wanted to convey these in a short sense as well, is that firstly, we as humans, we're pretty much hardwired to notice the negatives. You know, like my partner might come home, have 50 great customers, but it'll be the one bad one that I hear about. It can be the same with our own levels of resilience. We notice those times where we might falter, but we don't think about the hours, days, or weeks that led up to us, you know, being strong enough to reach that point. So I think that's a really important thing for people to try and remember when they're in a hard time. And beyond that, I suppose that idea of writing things down, you know, it's so cathartic. We tell people to journal. We tell people to, whether it's get an app on your phone like Dailyo where you can emoji what your day was, or writing it down in a book in the bed like the old-fashioned days. You know, whatever that is can sometimes be a really healing process. So I'm glad you sort of brought those topics forward as well.
And it's great for reflection as well. It's sort of, like you said, you remember the one bad thing out of 100. Sometimes if you keep track of how you're feeling or challenges and how you responded to it, I do that every day. I do sort of like a daily wrap up in bed where I sort of summarize 3 things that I liked about the day, a challenge, and sort of learnings or hopes for the next day or beyond. And then I like every now and then to go back to it, and it sort of puts a whole period of time in context, so that, you know, that wasn't a shit week. That was a good week with half a bad day, and that's kind of good to, you know, to reflect on that.
Yeah, it's bringing the logic and the facts back to those emotional minded states that we can get in. Yeah, it is a great way to do all those things. You're 100%. So I guess to summarize the questions I had for you then, what would be the main, I guess, points or advice or things you would give to young people if, you know, any of our audience members today know anybody or themselves might be struggling with bullying or prejudice because of their identity?
I guess the first thing is just to repeat that message that it gets better. You know, that's not to say that what you're experiencing isn't difficult or that your feelings aren't valid. It's just, you know, please never forget that it doesn't last forever, that the darkest day is always followed by a dawn, as sort of wanky as that sounds. But it's true, you know, it always gets better. And to hang in there, which, you know, the places that I was pushed to a couple of times in that really tough year are scary now to reflect on. And I'm so glad that I hung in there with the help of a couple of great mates and, you know, and small acts of kindness. And so please, you know, hang in there regardless of what's happening, and lean on the people around you that you love and trust. And of course, reach out for help. Headspace is there for you when you need them, for whatever you need. And it's, you know, nothing is ever worth going through alone. Always reach out and ask for help when you need it, or just to talk and sort of be distracted from a bad day with something nice or mundane or silly. And so, yeah, if that's anything that I can sum up, it's that, you know, it gets better.
And that's a great message, I guess, to sort of wrap things up with. In terms of Headspace, for those that may be listening that don't know, there's eHeadspace, which we run as well. So there is counsellors on our website till 1 o'clock every morning. So even if it is out of hours, like you said, if you just need to detox and get things off your chest or whatever it might be, distract from a bad day, those guys are waiting to have a conversation as well. And that can be done just even over text. So you can jump on the website at eHeadspace and have a look if that's something that interests you guys as well. So I guess, yeah, Shannon, thank you very much for the initial part of our conversation. And I guess now there's a chance to open it up to some questions from our audience. So for you guys' benefit, I'm going to stop the recording here, so anything you say can and will not be used against you. So I'll stop that part now, and we can put this part up on Facebook for everybody else to get access to as well.